Alright, this is for 4th grade ELA. Perseverance is the text study. Today I'm going to read you Barbed Wire Baseball by Marissa Moth. Okay. Barbed Wire Baseball sounds like a fiction story because it has a lot of suspense and emotion, but it's actually a biography. It tells the true story of Kinrich Zinmara's life during World War II. Zini watched the wooden bat thwack the baseball, hurling it high and straight. He was 8 years old, and it was the first time he'd seen a baseball game. But he was hooked. "Father, I want to play," he told his dad. "You're too small," his father said. "Too frail," added his mother. But Zini didn't listen. He had to play. The other kids laughed at him. "Zini, you're a mouse," one boy hooted. "A teeny tiny one," another kid called. None of it mattered. When Zini had a ball or a bat in his hand, he felt like a giant, and soon he played like one. Many springs had passed since that first game. Years playing in the chill of the winter and sweat of summer. Zini got taller and stronger and better at baseball. "Why are you wasting time with a silly game?" his mother asked. "You should study and become a doctor," his father said, "or a lawyer." But Zini knew exactly what he wanted to do, and when he grew up, he coached, managed, and played baseball in the Fresno Nisai League and the Fresno Twilight League. He was barely 5 feet tall and weighed only 100 pounds, but he was a star player, casting a big shadow in baseball. So Nessie is a word that describes people born in the United States whose parents come from Japan. The action on these pages takes place in California in the 1930s. California had a large Japanese-American community at the time. Zini was chosen to play with star members of the New York Yankees. He led his team in exhibition games in Japan. He even arranged for Babe Ruth to play there. But that world collapsed for him when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. For the first time since he had picked up a bat, Zini felt as if he didn't measure up. The United States was at war with Japan, and 120,000 Americans of Japanese descent who lived on the West Coast were forced into 10 internment camps, most in the desert. The government considered these Japanese Americans to be possible spies, and without evidence or trials, locked them up. Men, women, and children, American citizens, all were treated like prisoners of war, housed in barracks and penned in with barbed wire. Zini, his wife, and their 2 teenage sons were sent to a camp in Gila River, Arizona. Outside the camp was bleak and gray and dusty. Inside the barracks were stark with crowded rows of cots and not much else. Families bustled around trying to make a home out of nothing, hanging up curtains, arranging tea sets on footlockers, piling dolls and stuffed animals on cots. Zini stood staring at the dry earth, which was broken up every now and then by a few scrubby bits of green, and all the brown and gray with a dull, coppery sky overhead. He felt as if he were shrinking into a tiny hard ball. So what do these sentences tell you about where the boys live? How does that make you feel? What are some of the words that make you feel that way? There was only one thing that could make the desert camp at home: baseball. Zini unpacked his favorite photo, the one that showed him in uniform lined up with baseball legends Babe Ruth and Louis Gehrig, towering like redwood trees beside him. He had played with the Yankee Stars in an exhibition game back home in Fresno, and he hadn't felt small at all. He pinned the picture up over his bed. He was going to play baseball again, here in the desolate middle of nowhere. So what do you think about what is happening to Zinni and his family? First, he would need a playing field. There was plenty of empty space, but it was dotted with sagebrush and clotted with rocks. It didn't look like much of a field. Zinni started by chopping down the plants and digging up the rocks, spending long hours in the blazing sun. "What are you doing, Dad?" his son Howard asked. "Can't play baseball without a field," Zinni grunted. "We're going to play baseball?" Howard grinned and started picking up rocks, too. Soon, Howard's brother, Harvey, joined them. Then other boys and men drifted to where Zinni and his sons were bent over in the glaring heat. By the end of the day, dozens of people were working on the field, not planting a crop, but unplanting, making the ground a smooth surface. Once the brush and the biggest rocks had been cleared, Howard and Harvey were ready to set up the bases. "Looks good," Howard said. "We're almost set." Zinni shook his head. "Nowhere close. We're making a real ballpark, and we'll do it right." He walked over to the camp commander's office. 10 minutes later, he emerged into the bright sun, smiling. "We've got it." He clapped his hands. "What?" said Howard. "What have we got?" "A bulldozer to level the field," Zinni replied. "The commander said we can borrow the camps." As Zinni drove the bulldozer, crowds gathered to watch. "What's he doing?" an old woman asked her grandson. "He's making a baseball field," the young man answered. "A baseball field? Whatever for?" she asked. Her son smiled. "So we can play." Once the ground had been smooth, Harvey brought out his bat and ball. "Now we can play, right?" he asked. Zinni shook his head. He still wasn't satisfied. The wind kicked up so much dust from the dry soil that the players would be eating dirt. "We have to do this right." He looked around the camp, hoping to find something to solve the dust problem. Then he got an idea. He diverted an irrigation line to the field and flooded it with water. Once the heat had dried the ground, the dirt was baked into clay, a clean, hard surface without all the dust. "Now, Dad?" asked Howard, tossing a ball between his hands. "It looks great." "Almost," Zinni answered, "but we're not there yet." The irrigation line gave Zinni another idea. He laid pipe from the laundry room to the field and planted grass in the infield and quick-growing castor beans along the edge of the outfield. The pipe fed water to the plants, and soon the clay and grass took on the shape of a baseball field with a castor bean fence. Zinni smiled, and now it was beginning to look real. "Come on, Dad," Howard urged. "Can't we at least mark the bases now?" "Go ahead," Zinni agreed, "but we're not done yet." Howard used flour to chalk the foul lines, and his mom sewed the bases from rice sacks. "It's perfect," Harvey said. "What about the spectators, the fans?" Zinni asked. "Where will they go?" Both boys shrugged. "Can't they just stand around?" Howard asked. "Or we can build rows of bleachers," Zinni said, "like on a real baseball field." So think about all the things Zinni has done to make this baseball field. What words would you use to describe the kind of person he is? That night, Zinni and his son snuck out of their barracks. They were not allowed outside after dark. Zinni felt like a boy again, tiptoeing out of the house with his bat and gloves so his parents wouldn't see him. A guard's light swept across the yard, and Zinni motioned to the boys to flatten themselves against the barracks. They waited for the beam to pass, then crept on. They didn't know that the guard had seen them, but the commander had told him to let them go, so long as they didn't escape. The commander was curious to see what Zinni wanted now. The three of them scrounged wood from the fence surrounding the camp. They removed every other post from the camp lumberyard. That gave them enough material to build a backstop and 5 rows of bleachers behind it. The next day they set to work again, this time sawing wood and nailing boards. When Howard finished hammering the last row of seats, he wiped the sweat from his forehead and gaped at what they had made. There in the middle of the desert on the edge of an internment camp was an official-looking baseball field. The rest of the place slumped dreary and sad, but the baseball field glowed green with hope. "Now, Dad," Harvey asked. "Almost," Zinnia smiled. "We have the field. Now we need the equipment." He passed a hat among the families, collecting money for gear. In an hour he had enough to send for bats, balls, mitts, and hats for Holman's Sporting Goods back home in Fresno. Several women sewed uniforms out of potato sacks. When the box of equipment arrived, Zinni let Howard open it. "Now, Howard," he said. "Now we can play." That first game on a bright May day, half the camp turned out to watch the teams that Zinni had organized. A breeze stirred the new grass. The sun bathed everything in a gentle warmth. It was a perfect day for a baseball game. 6,000 people filled the bleachers and spilled onto the scrubbery ground behind them and along the sides of the stands. So, point of the last sentence on the first paragraph. Which words make the internment camp sound like a person with feelings? How does these words help you understand that the importance of baseball field to the people living here? Zinni learned how leaned over home plate. The bat felt firmly in his hands. He looked at Howard, already on his first base, at Harvey now in a second, at the neat white lines marking the field. His eyes scanned the bleachers filled with cheering fans. He watched the pitcher cradling the ball, pulling back his arm, getting ready to throw. Zinni focused on the blur of white as it zoomed closer. The weight of the bat felt so familiar and natural. It was like a part of his body. He waited until just the right moment. Whack! The bat met the ball with a crisp, splintering sound. Zinni threw the bat down and ran. He ran to first base, then second, then third, his eyes following the arc of the ball as he soared up and away, far over the barbed wire fence. Howard and Harvey jogged to home plate before him, arms raised, grins plastered on their faces. "Now," they yelled. "Now! Now!" Zinni shouted back. He knew he was still behind a barbed wire fence, but he felt completely free, as airy and light as the ball he had sent flying. So what do you think about how this moment feels for Zinni? Right now, there was nothing else he wanted to do, just this right now, right here. It didn't matter whether his team won or lost. Like the powerful champion he was, he felt he could touch the sky if he wanted. "Now," he roared as he crossed home plate. He felt 10 feet tall, playing the game he loved so much. Nothing would ever make him feel small again.